What's up, everyone? I can still hear the music from the host, so I guess I'm the only one who can hear that. Andrew, can you still hear the music or no?
Sorry, what did you say?
I'm still hearing some built-in music from the host. Are you hearing that, or is that just me?
Just you.
All right, well, then I guess no worries. That's a weird little glitch, but let me get our speaker up here. Got above Twitter. We're in the early days of this platform, you know. Andrew, how are we doing today? You doing okay?
Yep, just having a little breakfast. My Blue Raz Ice BC 5000. A great example of why trademarks matter.
That's a great example. Dude, what's up, DegenMiami, aka Jonathan?
Hey guys, how's it going? By the way, I can still hear the music, right? That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how to silence it, but I'm trying to figure that out.
Actually, Julius, are you here on the AlphaScan account?
Yeah, hey everyone.
Does the music go off automatically, or do you know how to do it?
There should be a button on the bottom left from the Hashflow account to turn it off.
Okay.
Hey guys, just while we're waiting, I wanted to let you know that Alan's available for DJing birthday parties and bar mitzvahs. DM for more details.
This is an interesting
Nice.
one, guys. Yeah. Well, this is definitely tough. This is the first time I've ever had this happen on a Twitter space before, so it's the first time for everything. But yeah, I guess Brian, if you're listening, there should be a button that should hit end or something like that. You can cut the tunes, but. Oh yeah, Google. It looks like there's a button that says "end," Brian. If you just look at the that interface right there.
For all of our listeners, we'll be posting an educational thread on this later today.
Yeah, for real.
Nice.
All right. Well, look, guys. I'm not really sure. When that will turn off. But hopefully we can just try and tune that out a little bit. Andrew, what do you think? Try and give him a couple more minutes, or what do we think?
Yeah, give him a minute. I sent the bat signal into the air. Brian saw it. He's in Greece right now, and he's attempting to shut it down.
Nice. Yeah, we can still wait probably a minute or two anyway, right? Because probably people are gonna come in.
Yo, let's
there we go.
Oh, Brian.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
I just before we kick it off, Alan, I just wanted to say today's episode is brought to you by Hashflow, who's been doing RFQ since 2121. No fairy tales here, my friends.
Andrew, I can't believe you can't hear this music now. It's switched to like a light classical, so it is definitely better.
But actually, I DM'd Brian, and he actually has a grand piano, and so he wanted to shop it because this is his side hustle for additional trade value.
Nice. I was wondering how they pick the songs, but I guess we have the answer. Either it's Twitter or Brian is playing it in the background.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
I can confirm it's definitely Brian.
The classical music is like 10,000 times better than the beeping noise. It sounds like we're just like
for
chatting
sure
at a restaurant. So
yeah,
hopefully...
we now need like a quiet, soothing voice talking over how life is not so bad, and it's Thursday and things.
Challenge accepted. Are you ready?
Let's go.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to our space. We're excited for you to learn as much alpha as possible and take your trading game to the next level. Please enjoy.
Wow, that was pretty good.
That was really good.
I'm also available for birthday parties and bar mitzvahs.
Nice.
All right. Well, look, I think Brian will either go away or we'll have some light classical music or something like that, but we'll figure it out. First of all, before we get too deep into these lovely questions that we have prepared, if you wouldn't mind, Jonathan or AlphaScan, just providing a little background on yourself and who you are and why you're still in crypto after all this time.
Yeah. Look, so first off, thanks so much for the invite. Super excited to be here with you guys today, especially when you guys shared the questions yesterday. In the evening, I was going through them, And I feel so funny talking with the music. I love it. I really like the questions, by the way. They're really well thought through. I've actually had a podcast myself in the past, and I've been on a few. And I want to say this is probably the best set of questions I've ever seen. So super excited to be here. Thanks for really putting in the effort. But look, to give a little bit of background. So about myself, I have a very, very non-traditional background here. I did a PhD actually in chemistry first. And then I did management consulting, and then I went into startups because I want to do this in my life. And actually, Julius, who's here from the AlphaScan account, was the first person who joined us in the other startup. And we that was always fully bootstrapped. We scaled it to like more than 10 people. It was interesting, but at some point we just realized that Web3 is too interesting for us, right? And every time we were not talking about the startup, we were talking about Web3. And that was like, the peak of 2021, and then going into 2022, and the bear market came in. And then through a couple of different changes, we ultimately decided to build something new, right? And when we started exploring kind of what the new thing should be, we pretty much went straight into Web3 and started looking at data, right? And it wasn't even supposed to be a pure startup. It was more to, okay, for us, right? Like, we're degens, we're in the space, we want to understand it. But then we started sharing the data, and it ended up becoming what is AlphaScan right now, right? So we have a background in startups. My co-founder has done a couple of startups as well. But yeah, out of a side project for us ended up becoming what is now AlphaScan.
That's so cool, man. Look, I was, oh, there we go. Oh my gosh, that's so dope.
Nice.
Massive W.
Brian coming in hot.
Wow, I honestly, that's the first time it's ever happened. But look, I was honestly messing around with AlphaScan, yesterday, the beta, and bro, I was blown away. I was like, holy smokes! Like, I've been used to searching like ticker symbols on Twitter, like, and kind of looking at like, okay, what ones are bot tweets, like what ones are actually real and legitimate, like who do I actually care about? And when I saw that, and just kind of messing around in there, looking at some of my bags, I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I was super pumped to talk to you.
Nice, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, let's dive into some of these questions here. We had some lovely intro music, but that's in the past now. So here we go. Question number 1: Can you break down what AlphaScan is, why it's a useful tool for traders, and how it differs from existing tools that folks may already be familiar with?
Yeah, let's go straight into it. So look, on a high level, AlphaScan is or will have 3 things, right? The first one, which is what's already to a large extent live, is the sentiment analytics tool, where we look right now at Twitter, but we will integrate other platforms, especially Telegram, possibly Discord, maybe even YouTube, who knows, to just like truly identify, what's the hot stuff being discussed right now and what's not, right, on the sentiment side. Then the second part that we want to introduce is more on-chain analytics. To be very clear, there's a lot of really, really, really good on-chain analytics tools out there, and we're not looking to build what they're doing, right? It's a lot of work. It takes massive resources, and we're very impressed with what they're doing. But it says in the name, where AlphaScan was, where we want to find alpha, and we really want to look at on-chain data and identify where we can see alpha, right? So that's going to be the second component. And then the third component is around automating some of the trading, right? I think at the end of the day, the reason why this tool is becoming interesting to people is because you can act on the data, right? And we saw that, for example, during meme coin season, right? Like when they started pumping in April and May, you have to act fast once the signal is out there, right? If somebody starts posting about stuff on Twitter, or if a couple of influencers talk about it, or if like smart money wallets start moving into something, you might be missing out on, between 20% to a 2x run by the time you see this, especially if it's, night, or you're somewhere out and you can't directly jump on, on Uniswap or wherever it's being traded, right? So the third solution that we want to do is integrate the analytics with an automated or non-automated trading solution. What I mean by that is the bot narrative actually is becoming pretty hot right now, right? So we will have a trading bot that enables you to use the data directly, but we will also provide users the option to, trade, let's say, the traditional way, right? We're a strong believer in giving the users flexibility and a little bit of choice. So they will have the option to degen really fast into tokens, or you can do it kind of what you're used to from DEX screener, DEX tools, where you have like a Uniswap-like interface and then trade through that. But those 3 things is really what AlphaScan is about. And one thing I forgot. You said what's different from us to others. Look, I'll focus on this on the sentiment side because that's really what's out already, right? And I don't want to speak about stuff that is not yet out. I think the biggest thing is honestly, at the end of the day, a bit of data curation, right? And how we're displaying the data. It's not, anybody can go into Twitter and just like look for a hashtag and scroll for 3 hours, right? But the benefit of AlphaScan is you go into it, you click it, and within 2 seconds, you have the answer, right? And I have not yet seen a tool that allows you to do this with sentiment data. And I honestly, I don't buy tokens anymore without looking at AlphaScan anymore. Even if I already made up my mind, I want to know kind of like what the sentiment is around the token.
Yeah. Hey, Alan, one thing I wanted to give you guys a little alpha. This is part of why I was so excited about this, and I found out about it obviously through a lot of my my alpha trader friends on here. I come from traditional marketing, and then I shifted into non-traditional marketing. And when you're at big companies like Amazon, where I was, we pay tons and tons and tons of money for these very professional kind of sentiment analysis tools, which I think in general are a little bit out of reach for most folks in this industry. And one of the things that was really interesting to me when I first started at Arbitrum was I reached out to all those companies. I wanted to see if they had kind of startup packages. And I said, hey, are you guys working with anyone in the Web3 space? And sure enough, most of the native VCs and even the non-native VCs were shelling out tons and tons of money. And I started to realize how much they were leveraging social sentiment analysis to make investment decisions. So that's part of why, candidly, I'm so excited about AlphaScan personally.
Yeah, finding out like information early is so important. I mean, I've never seen liquidity move so fast. Like you talk about meme coins, like literally seconds matter. It's like basically a Formula One race. So shout out to you, AlphaScan. I'm very bullish on you guys, and I know you guys are going to be crushing. And follow up question to this first one. What is the best way to use AlphaScan? How would you recommend people approach your tool so that they can get the most out of it? And then my follow-up to that would be, has your experience as a trader provided insights or strategies that have kind of directly influenced AlphaScan's development or direction?
Yeah. So look, the last question is actually a yes, right? Like I think I mentioned it briefly over the amazing classical music, right? Like this came out exactly from that perspective where we weren't even thinking too much about it as a tool and much more as like smart, getting smarter about our own trades, right? So it's 100% coming from that. And I think ultimately, I heard about Bitcoin in 2011 and started buying only years later, but I've been through a few cycles, and I think the reason why it's resonating quite well right now is because we've hit something where people see that they think the same way, right? So 100% it's been influencing a lot, like our trading and how we trade has been influencing it a lot. So look, the best way to use it, I think, is just go into the tool, and if you don't have a clear hypothesis around like a token around the narrative, just click around and see what's there, right? I always I started pointing this out because this is almost like sometimes too good to be true. When the market is looking positive, you can go into our token view and just look at the top tokens, and maybe you filter by market cap or something like that. Actually, that filter is going to come out. I don't think we have that filter yet, right? But you have a good idea that Bitcoin, obviously ETH is at the top, and then there's other tokens like Libra or whatever that are small caps. The top 10, if you look at the top 10 small caps that we see in AlphaScan, typically if you just randomly buy a basket of that already outperforms ETH and Bitcoin significantly, right? And I think this is where really the power of this tool is coming in, right? Like so far, I have not yet seen a tool where you can go in there without even thinking much. You just look at the top token, and those are going to likely outperform like the broader market, right? So again, if you go in there with no hypothesis, this is what I suggest, and you're going to very quickly get familiar with it, right? Like, I mean, it's essentially Twitter data coupled with, a lot of data curation on the back end. The way I personally use it now is, like we all sit in different alpha groups, right? And so you hear tokens being mentioned left and right? And so then when I see something and I like something, for example, the Arbitrum narrative obviously has been very hot for a while, right? Like there's been different narratives coming and going over the last few months. So I typically go in with this hypothesis already, and I specifically look for these tokens, right? And then I look for 5, 6, 10 different tokens, whatever. And then based on what I see in AlphaScan, is the momentum picking up? Are the right people talking about it? Then I use that as a secondary decision point to ultimately say yes or no on a buy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to come in hot with a 5-part question because I'm here to milk you guys for as much alpha as I can.
Go for it.
But candidly, like I've seen you guys tracking obviously social mentions a lot. And part of I think what made me bullish on you was, the names that I was seeing were names that I trust, names that I look to for my own alpha. Are mentions one of the biggest indicators you guys look for?
Yeah, so we have now an internal mechanism how we look at which tokens to which accounts, which tokens to track. We definitely look at mentions as one of the primary point, right? Like ultimately, like you will see how often something is mentioned, but that's a subset of the actual mentions on Twitter, right? So like internally, we have an algorithm through which we run, for example, accounts, and then we see and then we essentially score them, and then based on that, we translate that into something that is in AlphaScan visible.
Huh. I'm interested. I'm curious. What other data sets are super useful for you? In terms of discovering this kind of alpha.
So look, right now we're very, very heavily focused on Twitter, right? So like we look at different things on Twitter. It's actually not just about like the tokens itself, but it's more about the curation on the account side, right? So we want to identify the accounts that actually are able to, we're not saying there's a causation, but we're talking about possible correlation, right? And we want to see that there's good correlation between price movement and accounts talking about it. So internally, we look at that, and then within that, we have like an algorithm, so to speak, where we put something in, and then we get certain things out of that, whether it's like engagement, likes, who else is following these accounts, right? Like there's like, I don't exactly know, maybe like 10 different parameters that we take into consideration. And then based on that, we translate that into what you see in AlphaScan.
I'm curious, and I don't want to, obviously reveal anything that's private for you guys, but any chance you're willing to talk about those 10 things?
Yeah, so look, and we won't reveal the exact thing, right? Because obviously that's a little bit our secret sauce.
Of course, yeah.
So, like what we want to see, right? Like on a high level, what I'm particularly interested is momentum, right? What that means is I want to have momentum in price, right? Because like if a token makes a 50% move, that's more interesting for me as a trader or investor than if a token makes 20% move, even if the total inflow of money is the same, right? Similarly, we want to see good momentum with accounts, right? What that means is, for example, right, like early on, we discovered a couple of accounts that are rather small, but they get really good engagement, right? Or they're growing really quickly, right? Or like you can see that the retweets are coming from other accounts that then give them good engagement, right? So these are kind of the metrics that we're looking at, and it's not just like the absolute number, right? Like because you can promote a tweet, for example, and you can fake 120,000, 150,000 views, right? But doing this consistently and seeing the momentum, the first derivative of what is just like the most obvious thing, that's really what we're focusing on, right? And early on, like I have a good friend, he's been helping us a little bit on the side. He did a PhD actually in data science. He's not like with us in any shape or form full-time, but we had a lot of discussions around like how to think about this data, right? And the other thing also is, my co-founder actually spent over a decade on Wall Street doing pretty much the same thing in TradFi, right? So like a lot of the experience that we've accumulated, in the traditional space, we're now kind of translating into, like AlphaScan and doing the same thing on the Web3 side.
It's so funny. Like you said, the two magic words for me, data science. Funny enough, I have a former colleague at Amazon who's a data scientist that's literally working with us on trying to crack the code on certain things. One thing you called out that I thought was interesting, and I do think it's important to give it a little more attention. And funny enough, it's just a little bit of a coincidence with a tweet I put out today, but I did acknowledge that a lot of times the best alpha is coming from kind of 10 to 30K accounts. And I think it's an important thing to remember because there are certain folks that are great at engagement farming and growth marketing, but there's a lot of like traders and researchers and analysts that don't come from marketing backgrounds, right? And, I don't want to dispel folks that have large followings because there are folks like, Lynn and Patrick and Thor that I do kind of look to for alpha. But in general, I agree with you. I don't think follower account and alpha are entirely correlated.
Yes, you nail it here, right? Like it's exactly, and kind of the reason why these accounts oftentimes are so interesting is because they're gaining momentum, right? Most likely a few months ago, they were at a few thousand followers, right? And then they started making one good thread after the other. They're doing excellent research, right? Like they might have a talk with a team or they listen to other spaces where the team talks, right? And look, the big accounts are big for a reason, because they already put in the work and they are where they are, right? And so like they wouldn't be big otherwise, right? But if you're new and you want to make it, so to speak, in this space, you're going to put in the extra effort to do this kind of research, right? And so, again, and we have a limited number of accounts in AlphaScan right now. We have actually a long list that we want to add. That has more like back-end reasons, right? Mostly because like Twitter data has been extremely unreliable, and we don't want to have a product that is unreliable, so we've limited it. But we have a long list of accounts, and even like internally a certain amount of grouping, etc., that we will introduce after the public sale to help users identify exactly some of those trends that you just mentioned.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's interesting too, because I think like one little piece of alpha I have is, when I'm looking at some of those accounts, previous to the existence of AlphaScan, so you're going to save me a lot of time and energy moving forward. A lot of times I actually would look at kind of the year that the Twitter account launched, or when they really started putting out threads, because as you guys know, for folks that started early that have been through, a bull run or a bull cycle, I mean, even just looking at kind of social, I mean, even on my personal account, it's like I can see 3,000 followers a month during, bull runs versus, 1,000 followers a month during bear markets. And so these are just all things that I think you have to consider. One thing I would love to talk about is, you guys talked about obviously how you're going to potentially expand into Discord, YouTube, Telegram. It all makes total sense to me, crypto native channels. I'm just curious, is there anything that you're already noticing on those platforms, even kind of pre-integration, that you can share with folks?
Yes, so definitely, I won't share everything because again, right, like a lot of this is upcoming features and, that's a little bit internal, but look, what we can say, and it's not a secret, right? Like I think everybody understands that the most important platform for crypto is Twitter, right? Like at least when you look at public data. That's by far the most important one. Like nothing comes even close to it, right? Like, yes, there's YouTube, there's other platforms, but Twitter's ultimately where it's at. I mean, we're sitting on Twitter right now, right? So that's the most important thing. Now, when you go into other things, right? And it's not just the public discussions, it's also like the public channels, but I consider that a little bit more like almost private discussions, right? Like if you have influencers with alpha groups, right? And those can be fully open, they can be gated, they can be completely private. There's a whole host of different like variations of that, right? That is something very, very interesting for us as well, because ultimately, right, like you said this before, right, like you want to be early on something. And if I'm somebody and I know this is going to be good, right, what am I going to do? I'm first going to share it with the people who I want to benefit from this, right? Whether it's my own friends or whether it's like a group that is following me internally, and then I go out in public, right? So we are looking at these kind of platforms more and more now as well to identify alpha and help users essentially be early, right? And the issue why this is actually quite not only a technical challenge, but it's actually a very important one for users to solve is there's too much to follow, right? Like I'm sure like we could sit the whole day just reading and then go to sleep, be exhausted, not have done anything, right? And with AlphaScan, the idea really is to, like distill this to, hey, here's what you need to know right now. Go and make a decision.
I love that. I'll give you guys a little bit of alpha in terms of where to maybe deploy some of those bots. I'm in two private trading communities, both of which, to me, to date, have been great sources of alpha. One is Primates DAO, so that's the banana on my profile. It's a gated Discord community. The other one that I quite like is called Fungi Alpha, which is a gated Telegram community. But happy to make intros for you guys to the founders of those communities.
Yeah, quickly. Fungi we're very familiar with. We actually did AMA with them. I'm a huge fan of them. We were actually in Fungi way before we started. Well, I was in there and Yunus as well way before we started AlphaScan. Huge fan of that. Primates I've seen. I'm gonna bug you about this after this call.
Yeah, no, totally. Shout out to Lewis Cooper. Shout out to Montessori. And yeah, the Fungi guys are as Chad can be.
100%.
Yeah. So, and that's for anyone that's not familiar, that's the mushroom on my profile. It's Fungi Alpha. One other kind of last question on this one. Obviously you guys hit the nail on the head. It's like folks should be spending their time on CT right now. I have a feeling folks will be spending a lot of time on AlphaScan in the future. But I'm curious, where else, can folks really look for valuable alpha? I would say, for me to date, it's been newsletters. I subscribe to numerous Substacks from folks that I trust. Most tend to have a free option and also a paid option, so they make it a little more accessible to everybody. But just curious, like your take on that.
Yeah, so excellent point. So, and by the way, I think Fungi Alpha released a newsletter as well, which is quite excellent. So, shout out to them for that. And Mono is doing terrific work on this. I know he's cranking 24/7 to get this stuff out. But it depends a little bit like what you want to get, right? Like if you really just want pure alpha, right? Like if you're in the middle of meme coin season and Pepe has already been running, right? And you start to hear about Bob or Wasi or you name, the shitcoin or small cap gem, whatever you want to call it, right? You probably want to be on Twitter simply because like you don't have much time. You need to see it and you need to buy, right? On-chain would be another option, but again, it's a lot of data and like which wallet do you want to follow, right? Like this, we're gonna take a slightly different approach to on-chain analytics. Now, these newsletters that you're talking about, or some YouTube channels, for example, last bull run, Coin Bureau was like all over the place, right? This is where Coin Bureau blew up. Why did they blow up? Because it's semi-long form, right? Like where you actually can sit down and understand a project. I mean, I remember I was sitting there in 2020 with a friend. It was the pandemic. We couldn't do anything. And for the first time, I heard about Uniswap, about Aave, about synthetics, about all those, during DeFi summer, right? And I was confused. I was like, what is impermanent loss, right? Like, what is this? What is this? What is that? And that's where like these long form things are super useful, right? Like I think newsletters now have become extremely, extremely popular, more so than in the last bull run. Before it was YouTube. And honestly, like one thing that barely anybody mentions anymore, but I'm still a huge fan of white papers, especially like when you can dive in and actually try to understand like what's the logic, when you see the contract address, when you can go in there, when you can actually look at the code yourself, when you have an audit and you can actually dive into the audit, see what functions are in there, right? It's important to point out this is like a very different thing of being on Twitter and Wasi was mentioned, let me ape into this, right? But it's this fundamental understanding. I personally would not feel comfortable for like jumping into a narrative or saying, yes, this narrative is hot if I didn't have this fundamental understanding. And this fundamental understanding, frankly, is not going to come mostly from Twitter. It's going to be this more long form stuff, what we just mentioned.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And the two things I wanted to call out just based on what you said, I agree with you. Coin Bureau, it's funny, like when I first got into Coin Bureau, it was very kind of every episode talking about a different token, talking about kind of why they're bullish or bearish on it. But I'm a huge Guy fan. But one of the things that they did that I don't think a lot of folks are familiar with, which I think is great, is, as there's a lot of folks that are just trying to understand like the basics, the difference between layers, what's a node, what's an oracle, all these things. They did a deal with iHeartMedia, which is, obviously one of the largest kind of traditional media companies. And there's now a Coin Bureau podcast on there, and it's very different content. And it is what I would call like a much more normie-friendly onboarding experience, trying to educate the masses. So funny enough, I have an entire kind of manual that I give my new hires to kind of help make them, as crypto native and trader knowledgeable as possible from day one. And sure enough, it's a playlist that has a lot of Coin Bureau episodes. And then the other thing I was going to just mention is you did mention Aave. So I got to give a quick shout to my homies Stani, Nader, Cree. We are huge Aave fans over here, and
of course
was very excited about the launch of Go. Also,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Next question for you guys. So, obviously AlphaScan allows traders to make decisions in real time, which I think is obviously a huge advantage. I think it's all about, to your point, being early. I'm curious, and I have my own hypotheses, but I want to see what you have to say first. What time zones, what countries are you seeing some of the most valuable alpha coming from? Are you seeing, certain geos being first more in general, or certain geos being more knowledgeable about things early?
Yeah, so when I saw this question, I was thinking about it. I actually have like two answers here. I think one is when you look at the actual location, it's not going to be coming out primarily out of the US, right? And I think that's my impression. And that has to do with a couple of things. But like even the now Avi was XRP, and you guys have a question for that later too, right? Like the sentiment here is shifting heavily again, right? And I'm very excited about this. But it's not yet like, we're not in the same kind of climate as in other locations, right? So that's a very, very big part. So I haven't really met like the majority of the alpha is, you know, at least if I know where somebody's located, is typically somewhere else, right? Like, so that's one thing. The other thing also, right? Like actually searching for that alpha. I mean, you know, like you guys are also like based here, right? Like the standard, like it's very expensive to be in the US. Let's put it this way, right? Like $100 are not gonna get you as far as $100 elsewhere, right? So I think the incentive for a lot of people to do this kind of research and actually really, really dig deep is much higher in other regions, right? So I think those are two major reasons why we're not seeing that much coming out of the US. Now, the thing though is in terms of like actual timing, I mean, you can tweet, you can schedule tweets on Twitter through, for example, Tidefully, right? I haven't actually run an analysis. The one thing I can tell you, I typically wake up and feeling behind, and I'm in Miami, like in the Eastern time zone, right? Like I wake up and I'm like, oh shit, so much stuff has already happened, and now I'm like 3 hours like on fire trying to catch up, right? Especially because Julius, for example, he's in Germany and he is very fast at working, and like I have a lot of like catching up to do when he's been working, right? So that's my sense here, right? But again, like I haven't actually run an analysis to like say yes, I would put, you know, my signature under this statement. But I don't know. I'm curious actually to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, well, first off, we're in Miami too, so we gotta hang when I'm down there in a couple of weeks. But yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'll tell you kind of what I see in general. A couple things. One, I don't disagree with you about the U.S. However, I do think there is a large group of, you know, former Wall Street traders, analysts, et cetera, in New York City that have gone anon and then positioned themselves like they're not in the U.S. So I wouldn't discredit New York City specifically as a geo. But other than that, I have to agree with you because, you know, a lot of these anons, they dox themselves to me. I know their real names, I know where they live. I'm very obviously respectful of that kind of stuff. Never dox your friends, everybody. But that being said, like, I think you're correct because, you know, knowing where most of my friends are based, most of them are not based in the US. I do think there's a large group in Europe. But I do think, to your point, you're 100% correct. Like, and I think a lot of folks in this industry who are knowledgeable about kind of how the world works and how money works are also smart enough to arbitrage life. And so that's why, you know, in my opinion, you see such a large community in places like Lisbon is these are, you know, UK-based traders that maybe come from, you know, the financial sector, the traditional financial sector there, that literally are moving to Lisbon to cut their costs down by 80%. I mean, I won't dox them, but great example. We've got an engineer on our team, you know, who comes from big tech, and he lives in Colombia because he's like, I can save so much more money and put that towards, you know, everything else. I also think there's a huge hub, obviously, in APAC. And what I would say about APAC, and I think I tweeted this even earlier this week, is you can't get stuck in your language lane, right? Like, you got to understand that while a lot of countries speak English, there's still a lot of countries that are not English first. And so, you know, one of my little hacks is I create a list on Twitter, and I basically, through a lot of my friends, figure out who these accounts are. And then I create that list. And then what I do, to your point, is, you know, the second I wake up, I go and start hitting the translate button on all those tweets and seeing what they're saying. But my hope is you guys will be able to do that for me and save me the time.
Yeah, you know, what you said, like arbitrage your life is 100% true, right? And Lisbon, yes, I'm very familiar with a couple of people who live there as well, and I won't dox them, right? But I know exactly what you mean, right? So 100% that's happening. And yes, the whole translation thing is, I mean, like for me, honestly, like the last, like probably 10% of my discussions are in a language that I don't speak, and I just run it to Google Translate, right? Whether it's like on Telegram or Discord or something, simply because it's a worldwide phenomenon, blockchain or Web3, right? And if you're just like purely focused on English, you're going to miss out on a huge opportunity like in other markets, 100%.
110%. Yeah. And the other thing too that I would just add to that is on the newsletter front, kind of same thing. You know, I'll subscribe to newsletters that are in, you know, Japanese, Korean, whatever it is. And then to your point, literally just run the entire newsletter through Google Translate. And it's just interesting to see like what they're talking about, what they're not talking about. Because I'll tell you, I was just in Kyoto, you know, shout out to Kudasai, one of the best trading communities out there. And it was just interesting to see like what they were bullish on, what they were bearish on, even from a macro standpoint, and how different it was from kind of what I hear in the US. And the other thing I would just call out for you guys is, in terms of kind of the US traders, the ones that are arbitraging, I do think are going to places like Costa Rica, Mexico City, in other areas. So I wouldn't be surprised if you find great alpha in, let's just call it, places that US folks are arbitraging life from,
Yeah, yes, 100% agreed on that.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to segue a little bit here into this this next question, if that's okay, Jonathan.
Please.
Just kind of want to ask you, what off-chain sentiment have you noticed over the last few cycles that, can actually move markets and force traders into action?
Yeah, that's a good question. So look, there's the standard stuff, right? Like off-chain, like, CPI, right? Like, like in the US job reports, like SEC comes out with something, right? Like all these kind of things. Now all the ETF spot filings, all these kind of things definitely move the market a lot, right? And they're extremely unpredictable, unless you're, like literally from the inside aware of it, right? So this kind of off-chain sentiment is very important. But I think broader speaking, one thing I've noticed with off-chain sentiment is that it only matters for as long as it matters. What I mean by that is, if you guys remember, since last year, the Fed meeting was the biggest market mover every month, right? Like you could literally see the market tank or completely explode as soon as it's clear like what the Fed is doing, right? Are we getting a 0.5% rate hike in the US, or is it 0.25, or is it nothing, right? Now, nobody cares about it anymore. We've moved on from that, right? Like, yes, the Fed still has its meetings, and yes, there might still be like another 25 basis point hikes, but that's not the hot news anymore. Similarly with like CPI, right? Like inflation was the hot topic. And by the way, it wasn't just like Web3, right? Like it wasn't just crypto. It was like stock market, the same thing, right? Stock markets would rally or tank completely depending on what the data is, right? These things have now subsided, right? Like we had a transitional period where this was really, really important. And now it's moving on to something else, right? Like if you think back at the bull market before that, well, I guess it's also a little bit Twitter, but it's like non-standard Twitter, right? Like if what's his name, Elon Musk tweeted about Dogecoin, right? Like that thing could rally like 20% in no time, despite already having billions in market cap, right? Or even the market before, there was like McAfee, right? Like he was tweeting about something and the token was exploding. So I think with the off-chain sentiment, it's a very fleeting thing and it comes and goes, right? I would say, and this is kind of why we ended up doing like Twitter for AlphaScan, the one consistent thing where you can, like not just have like these split seconds decisions, but like a little bit longer over days or hours at least, typically like is something that you see on Twitter, right? Like this whole like influencer game. Otherwise, to me, there's like a whole bunch of parameters that kind of like come and go over time, depending what the hot topic is.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered this, because there is just an endless amount of trending narratives. But, some of these, do phase out very quickly, but some kind of become cornerstones of the industry. How do you kind of, like, know, like, which ones are going to be which? Like, how does AlphaScan kind of approach these? Do you kind of have, like, a filtering process where, like, it's meeting this criteria? Like, this is probably has a chance to run, or it's probably going to phase out?
Yeah, so we have some criteria how we filter stuff. And I mean, to be clear, maybe that's what you're referring to, right? Like we have like a narrative section in AlphaScan now, but that's like whatever the token is, right? So Arbitrum narrative, DeFi narrative, yada yada yada, right? Like I was talking more about like the broader level narratives in the market, right? For that, I don't think AlphaScan per se is just the solution alone, right? Because these things are changing so fast. The way I actually think about this stuff more is more in terms of cycles. I don't tweet that much, but sometimes I tweet about it. There's like this guy, Bob Lucas, who is just the best in the space. And he just talks about like market cycles, right? Everybody's familiar with the 4-year cycle, but actually when you look at Bitcoin, it tends to go through 60-day cycles as well. And then within that, you have 3 cycles. So that's actually for me the underlying principle, if you will, how I make buy and sell decisions, right? And again, it's a whole separate logic, and it would be like a couple of hours to like really dive into it. But these cycles ultimately are driven by psychology, right? Like, are we bullish? Are we bearish on it? And then you overlay them with a couple of other things. Ultimately, all these off-chain narratives are just like a compounding factor on the cycle, right? Like, this like without even knowing about like cycles theory, right? Like if the market is bullish, negative news doesn't do anything. Positive news makes the market explode more, right? In the bear market, it's the exact opposite. Positive news doesn't move the needle, and negative news makes it tank more, right? So the cycles are more kind of like how I'm thinking personally about, like larger level buy and sell decisions.
Definitely well said there. Sometimes, not a lot of logic in these markets sometimes,
Yeah, that's true.
Gotta go with the flow. But, I kind of want to ask as well, what does a wallet need to do to get on AlphaScan's radar? Like, is it a certain amount of trades? Is it a P&L you have to hit? What does it have to do to suddenly start being tracked by your tool? Can you kind of share that criteria?
Yeah, so just to be very clear, right? Like that feature is not yet out, and it'll take a little bit longer to be out. Ultimately, we want to enable users to track any kind of wallet, right? Just the type of analytics that we would do would be different. And then look, we will, just like we're looking at momentum with sentiment, we would be looking at momentum of the wallet, right? Like were the good trades over time that, like that ended up being profitable, or is this wallet overall really profitable? We have a couple of these metrics that we will be applying. But again, right, like the idea on the on-chain side is more that we provide you a way to look at wallets slightly differently than you're able to currently to do on existing on-chain analytics tools.
Yeah, 100%. The wallets on there are definitely making some power moves. So they're not your average.
Hey, Alan, I dusted off the old computer in the garage earlier this week.
I already know. If Satoshi's going to make a comeback, you're going to see it on AlphaScan first.
I wish, yes.
But look, also what I thought was cool about the tool was, you guys literally bring the receipts. The token performance after tweet data, tells zero lies. What other features are you looking to add into the tool over time? And, do you get a lot of feedback from your trading community on that as well?
Yeah, so on the last point, yes. I mean, we honestly, we have a long list of features, feature requests or improvements internally, which we are tracking. And, obviously, now everything has been heads down on the public sale, but as soon as that's over, we're going to heavily start prioritizing those things again. So we're getting a lot of good feedback there. In terms of the other things, look, this is, again, coming back to the roots of AlphaScan. I wanted to understand, what is the data that's actually relevant, right? And we're gonna very much stay focused on this thing. And I was actually in a call earlier and they asked the same question. It's not just about releasing new features, right? Because you can very quickly, you guys are building, you know this yourself, right? You can get a massive surface area on the engineering side, a massive feature bloat, but it's not moving the needle, right? So more than just releasing new features, what we actually spend a lot of time on right now is looking at the data, cleaning data, right? Like what is actually generating alpha, what is not generating alpha, right? And on the UI, on the interface, the user might not actually see that many differences, right? But what the user is not going to notice is all the work going in the back end to actually see what's popping up at the front, right? So in terms of features, yes, we have more stuff coming out. Actually, we are about to release more detailed analytics, like on the, how a token performs, like price versus mentions and all these kind of things. We want to separate or kind of group mentions more into different buckets, right? We want to introduce features where we indicate, hey, there's momentum developing, social momentum developing behind a token, etc. But again, right, this might be a tiny icon somewhere next to the token. It won't be a completely new massive layout, right? But the real effort is weeks, maybe even months of engineering work and looking at the data to see what is truly generating alpha.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, you guys have been probably looking at this data a lot more closely than the average trader. I'm just curious, are there any, and I'm sure folks will see this obviously once they get in there, but are there any patterns or trades that you guys have noticed about traders that are successfully performing year after year versus just in one bull market cycle? Obviously, I see a lot of folks where it's take profits, but what are some of those patterns, I guess, that you guys typically see?
Yeah, so on the on-chain side, again, we're still working on it, right? So I can't give you 100% on everything conclusive results, but I think, as basic as it sounds, actually taking profit is important, right? And not forgetting even just what you see purely on AlphaScan, right? But AlphaScan per se works particularly well when you have a green market, right? Because if you have a green market, the risky stuff is going to outperform. And by the way, this is not unique to Web3 or crypto, right? The same thing is true with stocks, right? Equities, for example, right? You have value stocks, which tend to do a little bit better in markets where it's not that exuberant. And you have growth stocks, tech stocks, et cetera, which tend to do better when the market is really hot, right? Because people are seeing more future value in these things. And the same thing is true for these tokens, right? So if the market is good, then AlphaScan is the tool to use, in my opinion, right? Because simply, you can go and then you see that the tokens that we show without doing much work are just outperforming the market. what's more important is to figure out, are we in a green market or are we going to enter a green market or not, right? Because by the time everybody realizes that we're in a green market, the smart money is starting to take profits at some point, right? So it's very important to identify where in the cycle or where in the market we are right now. And the best example is this year, right? We had a massive, I would almost call it bull run, right? Like in January, February, going even into March. And since then, it's kind of been slowing down, right? Then what happened is we had some of these narratives come and go, right? Like we have the meme coins, right? Like we had a couple of other coins. Now it seems like the bots are really taking off, which obviously we are twice as happy about that, right? But it's a slightly more nuanced market, right? So being able to understand that is a little bit more difficult, right? And this is kind of why we started releasing more like the features around narratives, because you can actually pick up on this. You just need to start looking at data a little bit differently, right? From what you see.
It's interesting. One thing I wanted to call out is, as we talk about narratives, I worked in AI for 3 years at Amazon globally, and so I can see a lot of these BS AI narratives coming out. Folks trying to jump on the train, thinking that's going to pump their token or pump their company. I know you guys are run by an AI powered prediction engine, and I think it's safe to say that you guys actually know what you're doing. So that coupled with a truly decentralized auto trading bot, how do you see the emergence of AI impacting traders? And I guess even just to that point, like how can AI benefit traders? Because for me personally, and you talked about this earlier, I love using ChatGPT to like better understand tokenomics, or even to like quickly evaluate a white paper and pull out maybe some of the most important things. But would love to just talk a little bit about the AI powered prediction engine and maybe just where you see kind of AI in trading going.
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, right? And I'll try to keep it somewhat short. But I think first off, it's important to you brought up two aspects in AI already, right? Like one is this whole thing that started with ChatGPT, right? And actually my last startup, we're using GPT-3 as well back in 2020 already, right? And it's extremely powerful, especially on the NLP side, right? Like the generative AI stuff is going to be extremely, extremely powerful. And it helps exactly what you said, right? Like, hey, summarize this article for me. I don't have time to read for 30 minutes, right? Then there's a completely different aspect in AI, which is, okay, I have way too much data that I can look at. So why is this important, and tell me the important trends, right? And if you worked at Amazon, so that a lot of the even on the growth side, on the marketing side, right, like a lot of that is now being powered by AI, because you can't run it through an Excel sheet anymore. It's way too much data, right? So
Correct. We
are right now much more focused on the latter, right? Like, and the other thing here I want to say is, for me, and keep in mind, I come from, I have a PhD in chemistry, but I don't sit in our code on a daily basis, right? I'm more like on the product growth side. The line between, is it an algorithm or is it like quote unquote AI, is a little bit wishy-washy, right? Like, because if you break down AI, it's just a lot of algorithms at the end of the day, right?
Correct.
Just like pumped on top of each other. So, like you don't necessarily need to always have AI, like true AI, to get good results. You can just have a very sophisticated formula, very sophisticated algorithm, and still get to the answer, right? And so ultimately, this is kind of where we're coming from, right? Like we started with some more basic analytics, but again, the sheer volume of data that we have here, it would just take too long, right? So like we are very, very interested in using AI to distill what's actually important, right? But at the end of the day, even if you go, people only usually see ChatGPT, but if you actually go into the OpenAI interface, GPT-3, for example, you have a whole bunch of parameters, right, that you can manipulate to get different results, right? You can say, okay, be completely non-creative and just give me a very like conservative response. You can just go all out there and come up with the craziest shit you can find, right? So all this stuff is kind of like, well, we're going to go deeper, right? And again, to me, at the end of the day, you said it, AI is a buzzword. AI is going to be everywhere. To me, AI is like somebody saying 100 years ago, will I use electricity? Well, yeah, you won't light your freaking candle, but you just turn on the light bulb, right? So, that's a little bit like what AI is becoming for me. Of course, there's going to be AI somewhere.
I mean, last thing I'll say, and I'll kick it back to Alan, is I love the transparency that you guys have just in general. And, I've known you guys now for a little bit, but it's, just to give you a great example of this, because I'm cut from the same cloth, when the AI narrative started, you know, we started having conversations obviously internally at Hashflow, and it was like, what's our AI play? And I was like,
yeah.
we're only doing an AI play if it's truly going to like improve the product or improve the experience, because I don't want to be a part of, you know, a BS narrative cycle. You know, I want to create a great product that actually benefits traders, you know?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, you know, that's a great analogy that you gave there, Jonathan. You know, with electricity, definitely one of the better ones that I've heard. You know, just diving also into the next question here. You know, what kind of trends or developments in the DeFi or crypto industry do you see being the pillars of the next bull run? Like, do you kind of foresee new potential trading signals being born as this industry expands?
So on the trading signals, that's a very good question. And honestly, like the ultimate signal, if you drill deep, is going to be the same, right? Like it's going to be on-chain stuff. It's going to be sentiment, right? It's going to be what people talk about, because that drives markets. The way it's going to be presented to users, I think, is changing significantly with every cycle, right? Like in 2017, we had the ICO boom. Then in 2020, 2021, everybody was like, well, now we need like real dApps. Otherwise, a blockchain is not going to survive, right? Now we have like dApps, Uniswap, all this kind of stuff, right? And now I think people understand, okay, there's a lot of data out there, and we really have to make this use. And it has to be much more convenient, right? Like whether it's cross-chain, whether it's being able to look at data without having to like go to EtherScan and look at, you know, like and understand everything, like a transaction hash and all this kind of stuff, right? So I think the average user is just getting much, much more sophisticated in this space, and the tools have to follow, right? So that I think is like just going to continue being the case. And, you know, like what you guys are building, what we are building, I mean, you know, we're in my books, we're 6-7 months into the next cycle, right? So like, this is going to be the narrative of this coming bull run, right? There's one thing which I will say, which is sometimes maybe a little bit, you know, it might raise some eyebrows, but I think this is a very important pillar of, I don't know if this bull run or the bull run after, which is regulation. We've seen too many issues at the end of the last bull run, right? Whether it's like with FTX, with Three Arrow Capital, like in Luna, you name it, where it was just like too much insider bullshit happening and not enough oversight. And we need good regulation. And what that means is we don't need just regulation by enforcement, which is just unfortunately happening a little bit, or which, you know, some in the US would like to do, but we actually need clear guidance, right? Like, what is a token? How is it being treated, right? Like, how can you work with that? If that doesn't happen, then I actually see larger systemic issues, not for blockchain per se, because somebody is going to come up with smart regulation. For example, the EU, what they're coming out with right now, Mika, I think. But blockchain in the US or Web3 in the US is going to be left behind, right? So as much as this is a contentious topic, I actually think smart regulation has to be an absolute pillar of the next bull run and down the road.
Yeah, Alan, I just want to say a couple things. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I think at the end of the day, what's happening is, you know, jobs are going offshore, companies are going offshore, and you know what? I think some of these countries are smart. They're like, we're gonna take advantage of this opportunity both for our country and for our people. So yeah, I agree with you on all that. Two other things I was gonna say. One, OpenX not gonna make it. and then the other one is you did bring up EtherScan. And I think, like, you know, candidly, and you guys, again, are making just everyone's lives so much easier. So thank you for that. Whether it's EtherScan, RBScan, SoulScan, et cetera, one little tip for folks listening, you can use ChatGPT to decipher that stuff and better understand it. So that's a nice little hack for people.
Yes. Yes, that's a really good point. Yes.
100,000%. Well, let's keep rolling here. We've got a few more questions for you. I know we've been cranking for a little bit, but it's okay if we'll just keep on rolling.
Yeah.
So let's, first of all, you know, fear and greed kind of get crazy during periods of extreme market volatility. Would you kind of say that's the best time to be using AlphaScan?
Yeah, so, you know, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, right? Like, I think the best times is when most people might not be looking at stuff, right? Like, it's before stuff starts to run really, really hot, because that's where you can pick up the signal, right? Like, I mean, and forget AlphaScan for a second, right? Like, we are much more comfortable going into a token that we hear is going to be hot, but it hasn't made a 5x yet, right? If a token is already hot and made a multiple X run, it might do another 10x, right? Vela was the perfect case, right? Like Vela went from like 15 cents to like $7 or so. And I actually found it at $1, or like saw it for the first time at $1. I was like, shit, this is already up 6x. Should I really go into it? And I actually did. And I was very happy because it was a good outcome, right? But it's a much more queasy feeling than going to something else, which I know has a good product, but the token hasn't made a major move yet, right? So for me, what that means with AlphaScan is, because we're looking at sentiment, I want to find these tokens that have been performing that have been performing well from a sentiment perspective, right? That are getting the right attention, building the right momentum, but necessarily didn't have yet like a massive run. So like, like for example, the last 2 weeks, if I was not like actually focused on what we're building, I was actually looking at the data more, because I don't know exactly if it's now, next week, or in 3 or 4 weeks, but I do think we will have another like small cap run relatively soon, right? And that's exactly where AlphaScan, like being early in these tokens before they start running, that's where you see these outsized returns and the maximum impact for yourself.
Actually funny, one thing I just wanted to call out, I'm curious to get your take on this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but one thing I've noticed, because we all know how important kind of events are, especially like Ethereum community-related events. Do you ever see an actual impact specifically around these events?
What specific events do you have in mind? Sorry, I'm not
Yeah, no. Just to clarify. So one thing I've always hypothesized, and I kind of know this before, is like, DevCon, ECC, and it may just be tied to, honestly, major announcements, i.e., the Chainlink announcement that just happened, it triggers the Chainlink pump. But I'm just curious, like, do you think that it's the alpha that's being released on stage that's impacting that? Do you think there's more of a macro piece at play?
So, okay. So, and I don't have hard, like, somebody might come here with like hard data and be like, no, I'm wrong, and I'll fully accept that, right?
Totally.
My opinion and what I have seen based on experience is that this was a hot thing back in 2017. For example, when ETH went from like $80 to $400 in 2017, there was consensus. And that was the first time where people really, really realized, hey, smart contracts have something very important, right? And this is what pumped, in my opinion, a lot like the ETH run there. Now, honestly, I don't think so. I mean, I live in Miami. I've been, like Bitcoin 2021, 2022, 2023. I've seen this all the time. And I keep hearing this, oh, this is going to like move people more and they're going to buy more. I personally have not noticed this, right? Like I've also been, for example, to NFT New York the last 2 years. NFTs were already hot, but if anything, like everybody was expecting that, and there was like a bit of a like front running, like, but way ahead of that, right? That's where Moonbirds came out like way before that, and they were running really, really hot, right? But I personally don't think these things matter that much anymore. But again, right, like it's very possible somebody comes here with like data, and good example, right? Like Chainlink, there are some of these things which are not just like the conference, but like these announcements, in which case, yes, it can run. So that is definitely true.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, the one piece of alpha that I have, or that I believe, kind of my hypothesis is kind of exactly that. And it's funny because like when you go to DevCon, for example, it's positioned as a developer event. It's all kind of developer presentations, things like that. But you'd be surprised to see how many high value traders attend these events, because I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to catch that announcement before it hits mainstream press and just be a little earlier than everyone else.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Nothing like a Degen event. I have a blast at those, but no, that's for another day. I kind of want to ask you, we kind of touched on the resources a little bit in the beginning, but maybe talk about your own like personal consumption. Like, how do you kind of stay updated on the latest trends and developments in like both crypto and like, the trading practices as well? Like, are there any resources that we should know about? It could be podcasts. We talked about newsletters, accounts to follow, but just anything that comes to the top of your mind would be great.
Yeah. So look, the last few months I've had very little time to follow. I actually, unfortunately, unsubscribed from a whole bunch of newsletters that I used to pay attention to. So on the Web3 side and crypto side, I mean, and you probably see this too, right? Because you're building, you kind of always know when something important is happening, right? Like I don't need to wait like for a weekly newsletter to tell me what's happening in the space, because A, I'm sitting on Twitter 24/7, and B, especially on my team, Julius, he's awake 6 hours before me. And if something important is happening, I'll have a message from him, right? Because he knows that it's helpful to share with the broader team, right? So that's typically the thing that I get. Now, again, on the cycle stuff, longer term, Bob Lucas is the guy who I follow. And I'm personally actually quite a big fan of Glassnode. They do on-chain analytics, but quite different. They do primarily Bitcoin, a little bit of ETH. and they look at, for example, things like cohorts, right? Like what are whales doing? What are like dormant tokens doing, right? Like all this kind of stuff. I find it super, super interesting because it helps me understand high level trends a little bit better. But that's pretty much it. In the past, there's one small thing. I'm interested in Gen Art, and a friend of mine asked him on Twitter. He has a podcast and like a small media company. I think that's what I would call it. It's called Collector's Corner, and they have they have by far the best content for Gen Art. But that's again, right? Like that's my own personal interest because I love that type of NFTs. Other than that, it's more. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. One, fellow Gen Art collector and enthusiast.
Nice.
Friends with a lot of those folks. And it's just interesting to see a lot of the different technologies they're using, especially some of the folks over in Japan that I follow. The other one I was going to call out, I agree with you, by the way, on the Glassnode note. I'm a big fan of Lynn Alden. Like I like to read her news. Yeah, I like to read her newsletter again, more for like macro perspectives. And then also, you know, she is a little bit more Bitcoin leaning. So it's interesting to see her take on some of that stuff as well.
Yes, so exactly. So that I wanted to add, like non-Web3 stuff. Lynn Alden and the All In podcast are like the two things that I listen to or read religiously. Like Lynn Alden has by far, I think she should run the Treasury or the Fed or something like that. We would be in a way better situation than what we have right now here in the US.
Lynn Alden, if you're listening, you're a chatter.
Love that. Well, I guess the next question we kind of have for you, we've talked about this a little bit, but what about like for normies? How would a crypto newbie, use AlphaScan? Like we're probably predicting, next crypto bull market will bring in a lot of people, hopefully. Kind of advice would you give somebody who's new to crypto investing and wants to start, building a successful portfolio?
Yeah, look, I always tell people get smart on what you're buying, right? Because the industry is so full of danger. It doesn't even have to be a scam, right? Like, but something could just like go off the rails and then like, oh, somebody told me to buy this and now my life savings is kind of gone. You hear way too much about this. Putting that aside, I mean, this is again, right, like what we mentioned in the beginning. You go into our token view, you just filter it by like the smaller caps, assuming you want to outperform the market, and there you have it, right? And then really, like I always recommend people to do research and understand what the underlying token is, because there's an inherent risk that could actually hurt if you don't. But that's the easiest view. You just go there, you see what they have, what we have, and usually when we look at this, it's outperforming the market by at least 2x, probably more to like 4 to 5x in a typical situation.
That's awesome. We're going to take a little pivot here and talk about our frenemies. We're seeing a lot of, TradFi entities like BlackRock, obviously, jumping in, digital gold.
Yep.
Personally for me, I see pros and cons to this. But I'm just curious, do you envision we might be closer to mass adoption than other folks believe? And, I'll let you answer and then I'll give you kind of my take, but I want to see your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the last bull run, right, like, which I forget, El Salvador started buying Bitcoin, right? Like we had MicroStrategy make a lot of noise around this. So with every cycle, we get more of this adoption, right? And look, blockchain in any kind of technology, right? Like it was the same thing, by the way, with like normal tech in the 80s, 90s, right? Like it was first a super niche thing and then it became mainstream. For this to actually become mainstream, either as a distributed ledger or as a, like substitute for money or currencies in some instances, it has to get mass adoption. There's just no way around it. It cannot stay like, between us here with a couple of degens and a couple of people who just want to, make a quick buck and that's it, right? Like it has to get to that level. So it's inevitable. I'm actually very bullish. I have my own thoughts on this, but like I don't think it's a coincidence that we see 6 ETFs filing almost all at the same time, right? While, like the government on one hand is kind of like harping on crypto, but then letting them, kind of like giving indication, hey, why don't you try this, right? So I think we will see a lot of adoption in the next bull run. We've had this technology around now for what, like 14 years, right? The time is getting there. People clearly realize that this is here to stay, whether they like it or not, right? And ultimately, just thinking from a alpha perspective, it's very difficult to find assets where you can actually generate good outcome. What I mean by that, right? Like we have risk-free, you can get 5.5%, 6%, whatever the rates are in your local country right now, right? That's a lot. We were at 0% 2 years ago. So now if you have an asset risk adjusted that you're buying into, you need significant upside on top of that, right? And if we're being honest, equities are still pretty expensive. Yes, the multiples have come down and such, right? But all this like collapse that people have been talking about, that just didn't happen, right? So it's, yes, I'm bullish on equities. I don't think we're going to see a further bear market decline, but it's not that easy to buy into that, right? So now you need to keep going further out on the risk curve, right? So where do you end up? Okay, you have kind of, you can go into junk bonds, you can go into like small, like small caps on the equity side, right? Like, but at some point you end up with crypto. It's inevitable, right? So I think that the market is 100% ripe for this explosion of mass adoption.
So two things I'll say to that. Well, first off, yes, I agree with everything you said. To quote my favorite, one of my favorite music artists of all time, no matter how hard they try, they can't stop us now. And one other thing I just wanted to call out, because as you guys know, I don't do paid shills, but I do shill my friends and I shill things that I believe in, aka why you guys are on right now. Wallet Guard. I highly encourage anyone in the audience, go to Wallet Guard, download the Chrome browser, not the Chrome browser, the Chrome extension. And then it does basically advanced kind of prediction on what's going to happen to your wallet before you do something. So really great way to protect yourself, because I'm sure like you guys, I am just getting tagged left and right by scammers right now, you know?
Yeah. So actually they're relatively new, right? Because I saw them, I think like 6 months or 12 months ago, and they were in private beta and you couldn't use them. So thank you for pointing it out, because I've wanted to use them. I already opened it. I'll get it right after.
Yeah, definitely use it. I know those guys IRL. They, similar to you, have very legitimate backgrounds. I think one of them comes from cybersecurity, like big cybersecurity. So, but I just think, again, like both of you guys are just bringing so much value to the ecosystem. So I think that's a good call out. Going back to the TradFi stuff for just 1 second, and again, I do agree with pretty much everything you said. Do you foresee kind of TradFi's involvement triggering a bull run or triggering a turbo bull run? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but I'd love to see what you think.
Definitely, right? Like just having, like these things join us on this, on what they probably think is the dark side, is super bullish, right? And people are looking at sentiment, right? And so if somebody sees that, it's A, more likely they will buy, and B, less likely that they will sell, which means the price goes up, right? So just from that perspective, yes. But then keep in mind, right? Like if these people, if TradFi truly starts coming in, the amount of money coming in is orders of magnitude different than what, like a few degens or kind of like, the entire space is dealing with right now, right? Like, so that would just catapult the market to the forefront. So I've been historically bad at predicting prices, so I don't want to do that. But is it going to be a massive catalyst and potentially an explosive one? Yeah, I'm pretty confident.
God, my bags love to hear that. All right, next question. XRP secured a W recently, and so did the entire industry, really. Do you kind of see this ruling acting as a precedent for other cryptocurrencies under SEC scrutiny?
Yes, no question, right? Like that's how the legal system works. I think it's going to be a slightly more nuanced situation, though. I have a very good friend. He does a lot of SPACs, and he forwarded me like an analysis from, I forget exactly who it was, but and I really liked or kind of agreed with what they were saying, which is the scrutiny is going to move a little bit away from the secondary market ahead and more towards like targeting scams and those kind of things, right? Because it's clear that the SEC is going to have an extremely hard time, probably impossible in the near and medium future, to stop, like to prohibit trading of these things, right? Because that's what the conclusion there was. But they will very, very clearly start going harder after scams about stuff that is not legitimate, right? So it remains to be seen, right? Because typically, like I want to be bullish on that. I don't know, I don't want to be too overly optimistic. I do think it's beneficial overall for the market, but do I think, like now it's smooth sailing on the regulatory side and everybody is happy and proud? No, right? I do think it's going to still be a bumpy road in the next few years.
I didn't know if you wanted to speak, Andrew. Sorry. I guess my follow-up question with that is that the kind of outcome you expected from the Ripple case? Did you expect them to beat the SEC, or did you kind of expect them to take an L?
So no. honestly. But to be also perfectly fair, kind of we spoke about like what reasons do I follow. I was not following the XRP case very closely. I've been like way too heads down on things, and as much, like as I'm happy for the industry, and probably in hindsight, I should have followed it a little bit closer because it does have major implications. But I don't really like, XRP is not my token, right? Like I'm never going to hold XRP token again. So because of that, I was not following it that closely. But yes, I mean, when I read the headline, I was like, wow, this came out of nowhere. I also perfectly honestly didn't realize that it's due that fast. I thought it would be at some point like a little bit later this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it had been going on for like 900 days. I mean,
wow. I didn't know it was 900 days.
Yeah, some crazy period of time, but definitely happy to see some crypto folks get a W. I was getting a little worried out here, but it is kind of what it is. And we have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll let you be on your way. I know your time is valuable, and you have tools.
We have time. I appreciate to be here.
Yeah, and then traders to help too, as always. I kind of want to ask you, what do you think is overhyped right now in terms of crypto and blockchain technology? Do you have any FUD that you want to share with us?
I don't like talking bad about stuff, but look, I think on a high level, I think in general we've gone through the worst bear market, right? Like there's been a lot of FUD around. I think it's important to look a little bit more positively ahead. The one FUD I will give is I think a lot of the L1s don't have a bright future. Especially if it's like VC heavy chains, I'm sorry, I don't buy into this anymore. Like we've seen this with Solana, we've seen it with like other chains where, like they're promised to replace ETH, just give it another more time, another 20 outages and we're there. I just don't see that happening. I think at this point with every cycle, ETH is just becoming more and more a staple. To me, ETH is on the same level as Bitcoin. And when I say ETH, I mean like the tools on top of it as well, right? Like, yes, that's technologically speaking different, right? But like it's one large ecosystem to me, right? So I think it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult to overtake that, right? And during the bear market, I was, for example, bullish on, I forget now, there was like Immutable X. They were like the gaming L1, right? They had some really good traction, and I'm still bullish on them as a project or so, but I think it's just going to be extremely difficult to like say, hey, I'm going to replace ETH, even if it's just like for one small thing. Because I mean, you guys are building, we're building. At the end of the day, you look, where's the most liquidity, where's the most interesting stuff happening, and it's on Ethereum. That's simply the thing, right? So I think ETH is the big winner, and the other L1s are going to struggle.
Yeah, well, we got to give a shout out to Batman on that. I'll tell you, it's funny. I agree with you on this. There's two L1s that I keep a very close eye on that I do think are going to make it. I'm not going to tell you who those are on this. No shilling. But I do also agree with you around the bottom. I think like one thing that a lot of normies maybe don't think about is, when FTX occurred, you had a lot of forced selling action. And so I just don't think that those were, accurate bottoms. I think those were forced sell bottoms. So, just be careful when you're trying to figure out kind of your bottom prices and things like that. And then, we'll just start to kind of wrap it up. I mean, the big one that I think we're as excited about as everyone else is, what's next for you guys in 2023? I know you talked a little bit about deployment into other channels, but just curious, like, where are you guys heading this year? Do you have any macro predictions? Close it out for us.
Yeah. So look, I mean, we have the public roadmap visible for anybody to see what we're doing, right? Like that we update regularly. I always say that because my next sentence then always is we have a couple of surprises coming up, right? Which we don't talk about. And one of the surprises already, we released like the Telegram bot for the public sale, which was actually very, very positively received, right? And we have some on in this kind of direction coming up in the next few months. The next few months are going to be very heavily focused on making sure that this funnel that we envision, right, like going from analytics to trading is actually doable, right? Like there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. There's a lot of features that need to come out. There's a lot of fine tuning of the data and just like so many small things, right? Like starting with like authentication, right? Like something that you would never think about, which we actually have to put quite a bit of effort into thinking through that we have to do. But, like on the high level, we see kind of these three things that we spoke about, right? Like on-chain analytics, sentiment analytics coupled with trading. Our goal is by end of the year to have the core of that standing so that the app is in place. And now we can work from a position of strength and keep improving features. And it's very, very clear to the users what this tool is going to look like, let's say 2 years, 3 years down the road. So yeah, we have our hands full. And I couldn't be more excited about this.
Well, look, man, we appreciate you guys, stopping by, sharing some alpha. You guys were here for a good chunk of time too. Thanks for putting up with the lovely tunes in the beginning as well, like jamming out. But look, we're super pumped. Like, I've used AlphaScan personally, absolutely love it. Excited to see how that tool develops over time and how you guys continue to impact the space. So you have any final words, Jonathan, before we wrap up the top?
Look, I've spoken for a lot, and I really appreciate it. I just want to repeat what I said in the beginning. Amazing questions. I love talking with you guys. It feels very natural. It doesn't feel like, like a confrontational interview. I really, really enjoyed that. And we should do something. I mean, I know we're talking about a couple of things on the side anyway, right? But A, let's meet up in person at some point in Miami, since we're all here, right? And B, I have a strong feeling we'll be doing another Twitter space at some point in the future. We don't have it quite as organized as you guys have yet, but maybe we can invite you guys over and host something then.
Absolutely love to, man.
Yeah, Alan, hold on one second. I'm gonna make an offer to you guys just because I love you so much. We are going to be doing some, very, very targeted meetup events all throughout APAC. Probably throughout the rest of this year. You guys are welcome to be our partner on some of those events if you're interested.
Love it. Shoot us details on that.
Awesome. Let's go. Building that relationship real time, guys. You heard it here. But look, everybody who's listening, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully you guys are going to check out AlphaScan. Definitely recommend. Follow Jonathan, follow AlphaScan as well. And these conversations are also brought to you by Hashflow. So we appreciate Hashflow for that. Give Hashflow a follow as well. We have great conversations with people like Jonathan and AlphaScan every Thursday at 12 p.m. EST. All right, everyone. Weekend is almost here, so hold on and look forward to touching some grass. Andrew, what's up? Do you have something to say?
No, I just got to do my sign out when you're done.
Okay, go ahead, brother.
All right, peace.
Peace, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thanks, guys.